Hi everyone. Today I have the honor to interview Barry Fitzgerald, who is an author, researcher, and documentary filmmaker, and he specializes in what he calls the phenomena, so the various beings that live parallel to us, but not only the benevolent ones, but also those that can be quite hostile to our kind or to humans. So I can't wait to ask him all the questions about these beings and his experiences and his advice on how to deal with the negative ones if we encounter them or if we find ourselves in the places where they dwell. I'm so happy that we can talk about these very interesting things. There are not many people that discuss the things that you do and that research the things that you do. And I've been following your work for quite some time. And I love your books. I love your research. And I love your documentaries also. I know that you made many, some also in our country, in Czechia. So I would like to ask about that too.
Sure.
But first of all, I am so curious because I know that you've been researching the she or the fairy folk or the phenomenon, as you call it. So like many kinds of beings of different vibrations and different energies, different intentions. And you often warn people about not being too trustful, not being too open to everything. But do you have an experience with also like positive parallel neighbors that visit this reality?
Yes, Eva, I have. So I've had both sides of that sword. So I've had the negative encounters and I've had the positive encounters. The problem when dealing with this type of phenomenon is it's very difficult to understand which side you're dealing with, because they can be very indifferent, and that can be very problematic. And the way that the phenomenon manifests can also be difficult to try and understand. The best way I found to understand the phenomena is, number one, understand us. Understand the signals that comes to us during those moments in which the phenomena makes its appearance. That is very, very important, because those signals they can be detrimental if misread. And I usually call this initial encounter the 20-second rule. And the reason that I call it that is because within the first 20 seconds, our body is reacting to the information that is being delivered from this encounter. And this unconscious signal then begins to react and manifest in biological responses. Now, if the encounter is positive, your body doesn't react. So that's within the first 20 seconds, it's important that we recognize those signals, because and it doesn't matter what way it manifests, whether it be a tall white being or a small gargoyle or whatever it manifests, whatever mask it appears, we can see through that. We have an ability that can see through that manifestation. If there's a threat, then our body sends the signals and we start to react. So the likes of the hair standing on our hands and our necks, that's a perfect example of your body telling you, get ready to move. So you're being given those signals to say, this is not what it seems. So when we understand those signals, then we can understand the phenomena. And when dealing with this type of manifestation, sometimes we can cause a natural curiosity with it, because if we go to their territory, they can come to ours when we least expect it. So be prepared for that as well. That's another thing. And there's a rule that I tend to live by, and which is, don't become too bright or they see you. So I tend to go to a lot of these particular sites, and energetically, from my perspective, I dim the light, so I'm able to move through the mist and get information from the landscape, passing information from the beings themselves, the manifestations, and I've learned a lot from that, from doing that, because they can be problematic when they come to your home. They can be very almost poltergeist in phenomena, and that can be very overwhelming for some people. But when you're used to the phenomena and you understand what it's doing, it's okay, and you just get on with it. There are different types of phenomena within this, that when the manifestation occurs, it can be a nuisance, it can be troublesome, and it can be very menacing. So again, it's about understanding us. It's about understanding our defenses and how we can boost those defenses against a possible assault from this phenomenon. Most times it doesn't happen. As I often said, that most things that go bump in the house are not ghosts, and most things that we see flashing in the sky at night are not UFOs. And the same goes for the fairy realm as well. Most encounters that we have are not the fairy. So, real interaction with this phenomena is rare. But when it happens, my God, you will not forget it.
And I remember you also advised that animals are good. They have this good instinct. So if you go for these walks with a dog, it's probably like the dog can warn you, right?
Well, the thing is about dogs. Dogs share something with us that we also possess, and cats are the same. There's a small grouping of animals that share a particular component that we have, and we work better with those animals. So the likes of a dog, for instance, when the manifestation occurs, when it comes to the surface, usually what we tend to find is that it can be, for some people, when they're close to where it arrives on the surface, it can be the smell is almost similar to hydrogen sulfate, not sulfur, hydrogen sulfate, and ammonia is another one. So those two particular components, those smells can be very, very strong in the initial encounter. But the problem is, if this manifests 50 feet away from you, the hydrogen sulfate tends to dissipate in the air pretty quickly. So from our standpoint, our olfactory receptors in the nose that would detect hydrogen sulfate isn't as strong as what they tend to be in animals. So our dogs have olfactory sensory capabilities in their nose millions of times stronger than we do. So the animals, the dogs in particular, can smell these things quicker than we can. So the dog obviously alerts us that something's wrong, and then we go on high alert. But we should also consider the fact that, as well, that many times when the phenomena does manifest, it deals with the dogs first. It will destroy the dog first, so that we become blinded, if you like, within the field. And we see some of this type of behavior within places like the United States and things like that, and various ranches where, I'll give you an example. A guy went in to have a look at this old ranch, and his dog stayed outside. The ranch was totally abandoned, and he went in because it was going up for sale. He wanted to see it, and he looked around the house. He was only in the house maybe minutes, and he came back out, and the dog had been turned inside out. It had been killed on site. They continually target the animals first. And this is not all the phenomena does this. There is a subsection of the phenomena that does. They take out the dogs first, and there are reasons for that. And I've just explained is because the dogs have a sense of smell much greater than humans, and of course dogs are they're our best friend. They tend to look after us first.
I won't take my dog to any of these places. That's for sure. That's really scary. And do you think it has something to do with the subterranean world? Because from my experience, many of these very negative ones come from the subterranean worlds.
This is where it gets complicated. Because what we're looking at, it's the same phenomena, both sides. Oh, sorry, I should say it's both sides of the same coin. They both originate from the same place, and we often within humanity's existence, we hear stories of tales of evil versus good, and black versus white, and yin versus yang, and all of this. These stories they're continually cycled through humanity's history. This is not our war. It's theirs.
Yeah.
They fight among each other, but we have got caught in the middle for various reasons, which I'll not go into now. But we have become embraced in the middle of this argument, which was never ours.
It's probably best to, like you say, just avoid the places where you get the chills and where you feel like it's.
Well, if we consider the likes of the works of Reverend Robert Kirk in Scotland, and he tried to intervene, according to legend. He tried to intervene between these two groups, which in Scotland they're called the Seelie and the Unseelie. So both sides were warring with each other. The Unseelie has great disdain for humanity, but being a reverend, a man of the church, a man of the cloth, he decided he was going to try and intervene and try and bring peace to the two sides, the two warring factions. That ended up costing him his life. He should not have been there. He should not have tried to intervene. They did not want his help. So it was unfortunate for him that happened. And that was in the mid 1700s that particular incident took place.
Speaking of these groups, in your book, the Searching the She, if I understand it right, you say that it's the Fomorians that are the fairykin, or the She, not the Tuatha Dé Danann.
The old texts speak of the Fomori. Now, bear in mind, these texts were being written by early Christians. So they're trying to understand the history, which goes back thousands of years on the land. Some of the things they did get correct. Some of the word of mouth, the oral traditions had carried through and carried some of the stories. The accuracy of those stories are maybe not as good as what we would have hoped. But the Fomori, there were stories of the Fomori being grotesque. Some of them were grotesque, some of them were beautiful, some of them were tall, some of them were short. And in reality, I believe that historically there were Greeks who had arrived on the island as well. Some connected with some slaves that had arrived on the island via the sea. So they were there first. There were people before that, and people before that. And primarily what we had was a group of people. The ones that really made the impact were the people who were coming from the East. And whenever I say the East, I mean the Middle East. They were from pre-Babylonian civilizations, Persian, and moving across, they tended to stay pretty close to the shores of the Mediterranean, and even move their way around Northern Europe along the shorelines up through into Estonia, and then across into that tradition. Then, of course, made its way into the Nordic traditions, or the Nordic Scandinavian countries, down into Scotland, then down into Ireland. Now, those people, and we understand that those people from DNA analysis, they were from where we would identify today as Iraq and Syria. So those people, they were the original mound builders, these stone mounds. So they came to Ireland, they eventually arrived in Ireland, but they brought with them something of great interest, because this goes way back beyond the idea of Tuatha Dé Danann and everything else. We're going back to a it's a almost, I think there's some references to it, is the Great Death Cult. Now, when we say death cult, we think, oh, that's bad. No, that's not what I mean. That's just how they're referred to as the death cult, because the dead were brought to the mounds. And the mounds have great connection to this phenomenon, because when our Neolithic brethren came to the island and they started using these mounds, there were three things that needed to be in place. The sun needed to be in the right position. The angle of the sun also had to be correct, because when the sun enters the lower part of the atmosphere, it naturally filters the spectrum. So we get this pure light frequency that enters the chambers at that particular moment. And there was also this style of Gregorian chant, Mongolian chant, that was also used within these chambers, because you got a great resonance within the chamber itself. And there was also a particular fruit that was eaten. Those three things had to be in combination before you met the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers were giant serpents. And Ireland does not have giant serpents. St. Patrick came to Ireland via Christianity, and of course legend says that he rid the island of serpents. We never had serpents, but on the doorway between the realm of the living and the dead, that's where we found the serpents, and we found them within the chambers, the stone mounds. Now, when we bring this forward and we look at the Sidhe today, the Sidhe, when we translate the Sidhe as being the fairy, but that's not a quite accurate translation, because the Sidhe refers to the mounds. So when we look at this age-old entity that is known to appear in Ireland, known as the banshee. Ban means woman. It's translated in the modern context, woman of the fairy. That's not correct. It's woman of the mounds. It's people of the mounds. The mounds were the doorways. The mounds were the doorways to the knowledge that was delivered via the giant serpents. And these were just a manifestation. These were how they wished to be observed and witnessed, because their appearance can change 20-fold in minutes. They will appear as how they want us to see them. So the Sidhe come from the mounds. The mounds were delivered here before the Great Pyramids of Giza were built. They were here thousands of years before the Tuatha Dé Danann arrived, who, by the way, came from the steppes regions and came across. And so the longevity of the phenomena on this island stretches back not hundreds of years or several thousands of years, but it stretches into prehistory. They've been here for a very, very long time. All around the world, in fact, for a very, very long time.
And it's so amazing that in Ireland it's been preserved so well. That's such a unique thing, because here we have these entrances, but they're not as preserved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took a look at your country and seen that you had long burial mounds in a lot of areas, where for us our mounds are circular. The passage chambers are circular, and the passage chambers themselves, we also see references to the passage chambers on the Akkadian wall art from the Babylonian periods, and we see these depictions, the stone depictions of these huge godlike creatures with massive wings and the heads of a beast, handing over this fruit to the priest or the king, who then was delivered the information that they needed to rule their subjects. So the fruit was essential because they didn't want to speak to someone stupid. So I've managed to get some samples of this fruit, which only falls every 4th year on the solstice. And that's when a majority of these chambers are activated. For some reason, the summer solstice has that masculine connotation, where the winter solstice is the rebirth. It was the feminine. The feminine chambers were associated with December the 21st. But what I seen, and this is throughout Europe, I seen a destruction of the feminine chambers across Europe, for reasons I can't understand. I don't know why. Why is it that only the masculine can have consort with these deities? Well, you know, it's interesting when we consider that you're communing with, which the phenomena depicted itself as giant serpents, but we're communing with serpents that was giving over knowledge. And the person that was the go-between within the chamber was the oracle, who was usually female. So you've got these two components, the female and the serpent of wisdom, which are now alienated in the new religion. We shouldn't follow that path. And instead, we're now being told that it's only the males that can deliver the wisdom. Oh, that's where I would have problems.
Yes, I was in Ireland in the Boyne area for the summer solstice, and I heard for the first time, I met Chris Murphy. He's a specialist on the Kells area, and he told me that St. Patrick could be decoded as a patriarchal trick, and I really liked that. It was interesting. But about this area, it's true that I visited many, like Lacroix and Newgrange, Hill of Tara, of course, like the main sites. But I felt such strange energy at Newgrange, and I didn't really know what to think about it. It totally surprised me. I didn't expect it. I thought that I would go in and do a research and for my book, and I felt like I shouldn't go in. And I had some strange, eerie visions, which I'm not going to describe. But I was going to ask you if you are familiar with the energy of Newgrange, like if there's something strange.
Newgrange was very, very clinical. It's very clinical, and you can't stop in Newgrange within the chambers. You're in, you're out. It's very, very difficult to make that connection to things. Now, what we tend to find, we see more activity around the world within pockets of magnetic anomalies. And we tend to find these magnetic anomalies by using satellites. So it makes for seeking the phenomena much easier when we're using the modern technology. And Newgrange falls on a positive magnetic anomaly. And within that magnetic anomaly, a positive magnetic anomaly, you tend to find UFO phenomena. You'll tend to find strange lights. You'll tend to find cattle mutilation. You'll tend to find poltergeist phenomena. All this, many strange things happening within this tight folded space. And then Newgrange, of course, is sitting in one of the strongest positive magnetic anomalies in Ireland. Now, on the other side of things, we have the negative magnetic anomaly. And this is where we see two opposing forces, because the ones on that side are very different. And we tended to find a lot of our ancient sites were being built. A lot of them were being built within the negative magnetic anomaly, where there was a type of sacrificial worship that was going on within these areas. And now moving into the early 20th century, we really seen this phenomena really step up to the fore when there was corporate business and certain particular individuals were reaching out to make contact with the phenomena within the negative magnetic anomalies. Because within that connection, within that two-way stream of information, there were promises being made, secrets and promises of wealth, power, and ego, and everything else was being made in there. Now, moving forward into the modern age, into where we find ourselves today, we tend to find that although sacrificial worship, yes, within pockets still happens, we tend to find that 75% of the world's top suicide locations appear in negative magnetic anomalies. Something is drawing people to those areas to end their lives. So that still goes on, but not only that, but we also found that 70% of the world's weapons manufacturing and research also appear within the negative magnetic anomalies. That's not by chance. And when we consider what's presently happening today on the world stage, Washington, D.C. is in a negative magnetic anomaly, but Moscow is in a positive. So we've got two opposing sides there yet again, playing out for the entire world this time to see. But it's a strange world, and knowing how to deal with this phenomenon and how to address it is very, very important. And it has many ways in which it does manifest. And before we started, you happened to mention the iron that you were taking as a defense. That is quite true, because this particular phenomena tends to attach itself to females more so than males, but they wait until they enter their monthly cycle. And the iron count, it falls, and that's whenever they strike. And they'll come in many different forms during that particular time. Many times it can be very, very frightening for the individual. And
yes,
when we go back and look at this idea of the different vibrations within the different pockets, you mentioned Newgrange there. There was another location up in County Donegal, and I called it the Island of the Dead. This was one of these ancient places. It was a place of oracle. It was a place where you went to find out what was happening in the coming years. This is exactly what the cult of the dead was designed to do. This was a remnant of the cult of the dead on a small island in County Donegal. And you mentioned that you had your experience there, and I have to say, on the Island of the Dead, I had one of the worst experiences in my entire life. It frightened the absolute bejesus out of me. And I said to my co-author at the time, I said, if that ever happens again, I'm retired. I don't want anything to do with that again. That was terrifying. And we spent the night on the island. And I have not been back there at night again. I have been back during the day, but I wanted to make sure that I had left myself enough time that I can get back off the island again, because I needed to run further tests to analyze what was going on. And again, we uncovered this ancient structure, this ancient mound that had been destroyed, but something wasn't quite right. Something had gone wrong, and the doorway still open, and is still open for anyone who decides to visit.
Do you have some other advice besides iron, like how to protect yourself from these energies, or when they try to, because they can become physical, right?
An iron amulet worn around the neck or sitting on the bedside dresser beside when you sleep, at those times when the body becomes weak because of the iron depletion within the body, keep that on your neck, or keep it on the bedside locker. They will not manifest into the physical while that is there. And there are reasons for that, because it's due to oxidization. And it's a chemical process which is driven by, number one, is ultraviolet light, oxygen, and iron. And they are absolutely terrified of that, because that's the one thing that can destroy them. And so it's very, very important to understand that. And when you understand that, that will defend you against the manifestation, the physical manifestation. There are other things that we can look at in regards to the types of attachment that may happen when we go to certain sites. Or we can just be walking down the street and an attachment will happen. And omega-3 is exceptionally good for that. And the EPA and DHA turns around the natural cycle that they're trying to disrupt in you. The omega-3 will reverse that within 15 minutes. And it's exceptionally good. Very,
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
So
they're
very, very good. Yeah, you're very, very welcome. But they, as I say, they can be troublesome. I've had my dealings with them, and too many to mention. But I did have an encounter on top of Knocknashee, which is the hill of the mounds, or the hill of the fairy, and where two appeared in front of me. And I had the camera around my neck, and I took the photograph, but the camera only saw one, yet I could see two.
Yes, it's in your book.
Yeah,
yes,
it's there, and the photograph is in there as well.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and but it showed me what was happening, because I had already gone past the 20-second rule. That was in the early days. I gone past the 20-second rule. So by that stage, they were already affecting the brain pattern that was already being altered. So they were moving me into a theta rhythm, where this manipulation can happen, and false memory can be put, and hallucinations, and everything else can take place there. So after the 20-second rule, if we are not listening to our instinct, well, then that's what tends to happen. When we see, for instance, a group of people will see a UFO in the sky, and I mean a natural UFO, not one that's man-made. A natural UFO, you tend to see people, when they connect to it on a conscious level, after 20 seconds, they'll all report seeing a different thing. It's a very, very unusual phenomenon. That's because they've already connected with us consciously, and they're manipulating what we see and what we interpret. But again, it's very, very important to understand that the likes of the UFOs, the natural UFO, the stuff that's been going on for thousands of years, and the likes of the poltergeist phenomena, the fairy, the jinn, the old gods, it's all the same phenomena. It's all the same thing. We're just interpreting it differently. There are common threads that join all the phenomena together. There's one thing to remember, that no matter whether it be a grey alien, whether it be a fairy, whether it be a jinn, whether it be the old god, they can all be summoned by an esoteric cult practice. This is nothing coming from Alpha Centauri across the gulf of space. No, this can be summoned on the surface of this planet.
Mm-hmm.
That is not alien. This is something else.
It's something else. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And you often say that they are kind of dependent on us. What do you mean by that?
Yes, they need the worship. That's the one thing we see continually, time after time after time. They don't want hundreds and thousands of people, but they small groups they enjoy. They revel being worshipped, being and they'll depict themselves as being whatever the case may be. But the one person within the group that suddenly goes, wait a minute, this isn't quite right. Then the phenomena either gets enraged or it leaves immediately. And that's why I'm always instilling into people, make sure and test it. When something appears and makes its connection with you, test it. Make sure you know what you're dealing with, because they are the wizards at deception. So we have to think about that, realize that, to make sure that we know what we're dealing with. And as I always said, if you have a phenomena that's appearing in front of you and making communications, or even if it hasn't communicated and you're getting the messages through your mind, whatever the case may be, test it. Make sure and test it, because I have seen it time and time and time again where people have not tested the phenomena and it has ended up in a bad situation.
Yeah. And even when it shows up as something beautiful, bright, always test it. And you call these beings the shining ones. I'm not sure if you want to get into that, because I know they're your nemesis.
My nemesis.
But if you want to say something about them, if not, it's fine.
Yeah, the shining ones, I have a problem with the shining ones, because again, this was a situation in which we needed to test them. And I think a perfect example of that is Lourdes in France, where we have Bernadette, who was a young child who was out walking by this cliff face, and from the mouth of a cave, this shining one appeared, and she wore a blue sash, and Bernadette was looking at her, trying to figure out, what is this? And as Bernadette was starting to get a little frightened, she started into praying, and this shining one started mimicking what she was doing with her mouth. And she couldn't understand what she was. But of course, later interactions developed, the church got involved, and suddenly now Bernadette has been seeing Our Lady. Now, of course, it's become something which is big for the church now in France, which grants entirely up to themselves. But it's important to remember that Bernadette's diary at the very beginning, it really, really sets it out for us in black and white. Because when they started carving statues of Our Lady, Bernadette got annoyed, because she said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's Our Lady." "Well, that's not what I saw." And she was getting annoyed by this. But in her own words, she didn't know who she was seeing. She had no idea. And this girl was religious, but she didn't know what she was looking at or who she was looking at. And she said she referred to it as that thing. That's in her words. The initial encounter was that thing. That tells us all we need to know. And what I tend to see, I went back over the figures of when the shining ones manifest, and there's a distinct pattern in the accumulation of manifestations all over the world within 10 years of a major outbreak of war. And we've seen that time and time again throughout the 20th century. We're able to tie them, the majority of the manifestations, we're able to tie them to specific outbreaks of war, usually within a 10-year period. So,
that's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So again, it's about questioning the shining ones, and they appear within ufology as well. They're called the Nordics or the shining ones, or they're
Oh, yeah.
from the Pleiades star system. It's all BS. It's
Oh,
we
okay.
shouldn't get caught up in that. We need to test them
Yes.
and
Yes.
find out,
Yes.
because as I pointed out on my Facebook there just the other day, I put up a picture of Our Lady at a border control, and a guard had her passport. And I said, why is it that when someone comes to our door, say the gas man or the electricity man, we have to see his ID before we let him in? Why are we not doing the
Yes.
same
Yes.
to the phenomena?
Yes.
We don't.
Mm-hmm.
We just let it in, and
Yeah.
problems start.
I wonder if it was the shining one, but my husband told me that he saw a being that was like shining bright light when he was a teenager in Iceland. And he
Yeah,
had this intense kind of a fear, or like a overwhelming, he didn't find it positive.
that's the 20-second rule. You just
Yes,
described the
yes.
20-second rule. He got the
Even though
fear. That was not
it
what it
seemed
was portraying itself
angelic,
to be.
but
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yes, because
Yeah,
they can
that's exactly.
appear, like something appealing, because the light, and we are taught always like the light is the way to God and to heaven. So when something bright appears, then I suppose that most people have this feeling that they're seeing an angel or something positive.
Well, it's an
Yes.
interesting thing that you mentioned there about that, because when we go back and we look at, if we even just touch on the idea of modern religion, the idea that Lucifer was the shining star, he was the
Mm,
bright one,
yes.
beautiful creature. So
Mhm.
we're led to believe, and also within the likes of Lord of the Rings is another perfect example, where we've got the elfin, who are tall, their skin almost glows, beautiful creatures. But when we go back and we look at the tradition of the elf, they're not beautiful, by no means, because they're short, they're ugly, they're bad tempered, and it's amazing to see what they have morphed into now, and how we
Well,
perceive the
some of them
elfin
are tall.
kind.
They're they're different kinds of elves, like you say, the
Well,
wrinkly kind of
yeah,
ugly
you've
ones.
got the gnomes, you've got the
Yes,
kobolds,
exactly.
and,
Yes.
and all of that. But the elf was not what has portrayed itself to be today. Far from it. And yeah, it's interesting when we go back and we look at the history of this and follow it back through. We can only get so far. Oh,
Well,
oh, yes, and you
yes.
mentioned angels there. I should point out, angels didn't exist before 584 BC,
Mm,
and I'll leave that there.
yeah.
Um, what are we calling in?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, true. But just to stand up for the elves, I have to. I also have experience with some beautiful elves and the hops and the little ones, the tall ones. But I suppose it's like with the fair folk or the fairy folk and the she. It's just there's so many different types, and I feel like they've been always put into one sack. Like it's just this, but there's such a variety. Also in energy,
Well,
of course.
yeah. Well, when we consider, as I said, we're looking at everything coming from the same source. That source has
Mhm.
been interpreted millions of different ways.
Yes,
But when we
exactly.
strip the mask away, whether it be tall, whether it be small, whether it be beautiful, whether it be whatever, when we strip all that away, we find out we're looking at the same source. Doesn't matter what way it looks
Hmm.
like. We're looking at something from the same source. So rather than getting distracted in the looks and appearances, now we're starting to say,
Hmm.
wait a minute, we're now focusing on where they're coming from. Why?
Hmm. Yeah, and like you said, they shapeshift. So who knows
Yes.
how they
Uh-huh.
really look like, right? And how they
There
present
you go.
themselves.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes. Wow, this is all so interesting. I also wanted to ask you about your book, The Deception of Gods and Men.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the gold? Like, why was the gold always so desired by the gods and us humans?
Well, that in itself, again goes back into prehistory. This is always something that we tended to find where they were appearing more often tended to be around natural hordes of uh, rich minerals,
Mm-hmm.
silver, gold, cobalt, all of that. Um, and again, we're looking at stuff that's underground, stuff
Mm-hmm.
that's under our feet. Now, we might get lost and say, we've got skeptics out there that say, there's no such thing, no such thing. The phenomena doesn't exist. There is more life under our feet than there is on the surface of the planet. There is more carbon being produced by what's living under our feet than what's on the
Mm-hmm.
surface of the planet. We know very, very little about what's down there. Now,
Mm-hmm.
from our standpoint, we from the deceptions of gods and men, the book itself was designed to look at and challenge what we're actually dealing with, and get the reader to realize, okay, this is maybe not what we thought it was, and to challenge what was coming through. Now, in regards to the likes of the gold, here in Ireland, we have a Patrick, which is a massive worship site for the Christians in County Mayo. At the very top, then you have this little church or temple at the very top of the mountain. Now, that again in itself is no different than the gods of Olympus, where you went to the gods lived on the top of the mountain and everything else. But what we also tend to forget is that Patrick was also a former pagan worship site where the serpents were worshipped. And
Mm-hmm.
it also sits on one of Ireland's largest gold reserves. Now in
Mm.
Scotland, we have another place over there, which in the 1700s there was a new metal that was discovered. I can't remember the name of the metal just offhand. I just can't remember its name, but the mountain itself is called the Fairy Nose because they were
Mm.
always associated with that area. But this valuable gold, or this valuable metal, was discovered underneath that mountain, which was also associated with the phenomena. So we tend to
Mm.
find these things are within these realms of the wealth, and with the wealth, of course, then the likes of gold is a perfect example. It sends men crazy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
for some bizarre reason, I just don't understand it. But it's just
Yes.
our world runs on a monetary system.
And it's also strange that the gold they seem to be fond of gold, but not iron. So it's
No, well, although iron, when iron is underground, it's perfectly fine. It's only when it's on the surface and you get the interaction with the UV, that's whenever it becomes
okay.
exceptionally problematic.
Okay.
So if we're wearing an iron amulet and we decide, well, let's go hunting for the Fae, and we go into a cave system,
Mm.
you're on your own
Doesn't.
because you've just
Mhm.
robbed yourself of the truth. So as long as we
Okay.
understand the limitations, then we're okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you are below, you're on your own. There's probably nothing
Yeah,
you can do.
pretty much, pretty much. And
Yeah.
I've had my experiences in mine shafts, in cave systems.
Mhm.
I've had my experiences with them down there too. But I have to say that they were continually trying to lure me further into the cave systems, further into the mines. And
Mm.
I went, no. My instinct said to me, turn around. This is not
Mm-hmm.
for you. And I left, and they were furious, absolutely furious.
But you didn't
So
fall for it. But do you think
Yeah.
this, you didn't fall for the trick, but do you think that this subterranean world could be kind of, or the underworld, like a blockage for the inner earth? Because the inner earth in legends and mythology has always been associated with something beautiful, some beautiful cultures. Do you think it's possible that the subterranean realm is kind of, in a way, protecting that immaculate world?
I would like to think it, but the new research now coming through on the last book that I'm working on, which will be my last, which is Born. It's called Born to Serve, and that states where this place is. It's not another dimension. It's not another planet. It's here, and we call it. We say this is where we find it. This is how far we have to go down to find it. And the reasons why we we're using science and everything else to understand the phenomena, but where it comes from and how it fits with us, because we're all connected with it, whether we like it or not.
Yes, but it's non-physical, right? We are talking of a different density.
No, it's physical.
You mean that it's like a physical place?
Whenever I say we've located where the phenomena is, this is not like what we read about in old books, like a civilization that lived underground in a city and it had this internal sun. No, forget all that. This is very, very different. This is very different. When we consider that life in this planet began from a single biogenesis event, it wasn't the only biogenesis event. There was another. So that's where I'll leave it, because I can't give any more secrets out about the new book.
It's your new book. Oh, yeah. Can't wait to read that. So you will be exploring the inner earth in that book.
Yes.
That's exciting. And you have another book coming up next year, right? Like the Staring into Darkness book?
Staring into Darkness got renamed, and it is now Born to Serve.
Oh, so it's this one. So it's coming out very soon. Oh, that's exciting.
Very soon. Yeah. We just completed the artwork for the cover, the synopsis for the back and everything else. So it's what we may do is put it onto a little SD drive and put it on the shelf and just let it rest, and then we'll come back to it and see what happens.
It's exciting. Okay, and could you just a little bit maybe tell me about what you think about the Czech Republic location, and have you felt some places that were really strong energetically here when you were working on your documentary?
Yeah, we investigated Huska Castle, and I have to say the castle itself, it was another castle to me, but on the drive to Huska Castle, and tonight I tried to find where the drive was, but on the drive to Huska Castle, we drove through a series of valleys, very narrow valleys that were cut, and on each side there were rough stone walls, of naturally formed stone walls. That place had it going, on the way to Castle Huska. Castle Huska, ignore it, but that place has it going. And I would love to have been able to have stopped, said, just leave me here, I'll be fine. But that place really, really did it for me. And I haven't really been, I was in Prague and everything else, doing our things there, but to get to explore the country the way we wanted to, the way we should have, unfortunately time was against us, so I wasn't able to spend too much time, other than make a note that this is where it's happening on the way to Castle Huska.
It must be because, yes, there are many thresholds and portals, and Prague itself means, Prague means a threshold, so the city itself is a threshold. So there's definitely some, I feel like there's some connection, even with the Irish underground or the inner earth. There's some connection with all these places, but it's probably a secret. And yeah, oh my God, thank you so much, Barry. This was such a pleasure talking to you. So many interesting things. Thank you again.
You're very, very welcome. And keep an eye out for the shining ones, and
Yes.
you'll be fine.
Well, I hope I won't encounter them. But do you have maybe some message for the audience, something that you would like to share?
Yeah, I would say probably the warning that I was issued: don't become too bright, or they see you. Live by that, and you'll be fine.